With David Raya now an injury doubt for game week 6, does that now push FPL managers towards a double Arsenal attack? We're going to be discussing that in today's video alongside all of the big questions being asked going into game week 6, both wildcard and non-wildcard questions. So you're going to want to make sure you stick around for today's video. So as always, if you look forward to it, make sure you do drop a like, aiming for 400 on this video. And of course, if you haven't already, make sure you do smash that subscribe button for daily fantasy content. Enough waffling, let's get into today's video. So game week 6 is proven to be a very popular time to activate your wildcard. A lot of very successful FPL managers are doing the same strategy, and I really do think it is a good move for those fantastic fixture swings for teams like Arsenal, Brentford, to name two. And if I was to build a wildcard right now, and I have done multiple drafts, it's worth noting, even though I personally haven't activated the chip, I've always had this selection of players in every single draft. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that you have to put these players in the team, but I just think these 5 players make complete sense and logical reasoning to put them into your teams. So the ones I've included right now are going to include Gvardiol. I just think with the Arsenal defensive coverage right now, everybody's going to have at least one. I think the priority is Gvardiol because he offers guaranteed minutes and, of course, attacking potential that we've seen in the past 2 games. So I do think Gvardiol is a question. In terms of the midfielders, we've got Bukayo Saka again with those great Arsenal fixtures. I want the talisman, the penalty taker, and the guaranteed minutes. And Saka is going to tick all of those boxes in the team. In Mbeumo, again, fixtures turn for Brentford this week. So brilliant home games against some out-of-form teams. And again, I want the talisman in that respective team. And it is going to be Bryan Mbeumo. And finally, Rodgers. Now, this one might be a bit controversial because, of course, his returns have only come in game week 5. But if you have been watching this channel for the last few weeks, you will know that I have been flying the flag for Morgan Rodgers every single week. And I think those returns in game week 5 have just been very much deserved for those managers that owned him. He's been fantastic on the eye. He's been one of Villa's standout players. And I do think at 5.2 million, he remains unbelievable value. So Rodgers is still going to make part of this game week 6 wildcard essential list. And finally, I don't really have to explain this one. It is going to be Erling Haaland. I have seen some managers go out there and try and go without Haaland, and it's absolutely fine if you want to be different with your strategy. But for me, Haaland's fixtures are still fantastic. He's still looking fantastic. And I know they got the injury to Rodri, but I always fancy Pep to find solutions to problems, and I think Haaland is absolutely going to continue this goal scoring run. Now, there was one more player on this game week 6 essentials list, and that was going to be David Raya in goal, because I really do feel like the double Arsenal defense is just a great long-term move. I don't love it for the next 2 because I don't really see Arsenal being troubled by the 2 teams. So while a clean sheet is probably inevitable, I don't really see David Raya racking up bonus points and save points. And I think at 4.5 million, there are actually great alternatives out there. But when we're wildcarded and looking more at a 10-game week span, I do think David Raya is just a great goalkeeper to put in as a set and forget. But as you can see from the quote here from Sam Dean, we knew that there was some potential injuries amongst the Arsenal camp. And he has stated that they don't actually know if he is going to be available for the weekend. He does currently have a muscular injury. Now, again, this could be one of those that's a couple of days and he is fit and raring to go for the weekend. On the flip side, this could be a sort of situation where he's out for 3 game weeks. And of course, when we're going for a premium goalkeeper like David Raya, we don't want to be putting in somebody like a 4.5 million rotation because you're going to play David Raya every single week. So with those doubts about David Raya, it means that he just can't be an essential right now until we do get information that he is fit for game week 6. But let me know your thoughts on this list. Let's get into some of them big questions going into game week 6. So Man City are one of those teams that are having a fixture swing very soon. While game week 6 doesn't seem like it away against Newcastle, game week 7 onwards with Fulham, Wolves, Southampton, Bournemouth and Brighton is very much a favourable fixture swing for the reigning champions. And even Newcastle away in game week 6 isn't as daunting as what it once was 12 months ago. So managers wildcarding right now, I do think need to have an eye on not only Erling Haaland, but potentially another Man City player in their teams. Now, in terms of attackers, I can't really put my finger on the best one right now. I think there's too much rotation out there. But I do think one of the defenders could be viable options. Now, I'm currently looking at Rico Lewis at 4.7 million, very much the cheap enabler, versus Gvardiol at 6 million, bit more of a premium pick. Now, there is Ruben Diaz, John Stones and Akanji that fall between these 2 price brackets, but I actually think it's better to pay a little bit more for Gvardiol or take the punt on Rico Lewis at a cheaper price. I don't really think there is any point considering those other options. So both of these offer pros and cons, and we're going to take a look at these right now. So Rico Lewis compared to Gvardiol in terms of underlying numbers. These are based on per 90 minutes because Rico Lewis did sit out the game against Arsenal, which in itself is something to consider when we are going into game week 6. When we take a look at the underlying numbers, XG, expected goals per 90 for Rico Lewis, is actually fantastic at 0.24 compared to Gvardiol's 0.09. And this is reflective of what we've been seeing on the eye test because Rico Lewis has been picking up some fantastic positions in and around the box. He's been inverting on the right back position and actually progressing up the field and picking up some almost number 10 roles at times. So he has been influential in the way that Man City have played in the games that he has featured. Now, in terms of shots, 1.34 for Gvardiol, slightly skewed because, of course, they were up against 10-men Arsenal, which he played in, and he did actually pick up a couple of shots in that game. But still, this is based on per 90 minutes, so it is pretty much averaged out over the last 5 game weeks. And he's actually triple that of Rico Lewis, which is quite interesting. We can also see that in terms of shots in the box. Gvardiol at 1.34 compared to Rico Lewis's 0.57 per 90. In terms of goal assists, Rico Lewis leads the way, but it's actually Gvardiol in terms of expected assists and again in terms of big chances created in the favour of Gvardiol. So even though Rico Lewis is picking up some fantastic positions in this Man City team, he hasn't actually got unbelievable numbers where I look at him and think he is going to be banging in goals like a Pedro Porro in that Spurs team. I don't really think we are getting that right now with Rico Lewis, but what we are getting is a player that is clearly now being trusted more than ever by Pep Guardiola. I do think Kyle Walker will have his times at right back, but with the injury to Rodri, I do think we are going to see Rico Lewis integrated in this Man City team more and more, not as a centre mid, but as an inverted right back to help bolster that midfield. And even though I do think Gvardiol is probably the safer pick longer term, at 4.7 million, I actually think if I was wildcarding right now, I would take the punt on Rico Lewis. Yes, there might be games that he might be rotated in and out of that Man City team, but it feels very much like he's either 90 minutes or 0 minutes. I don't really see him coming on that much historically. And if you can have another defender at 4.5 million that could easily rotate in those games that he doesn't feature in, I actually think the punt on Rico Lewis is very much worth it, especially if we're looking to have a Gvardiol and maybe a Trent. I think it's very difficult to then slot in a third premium defender. So for that, I think Rico Lewis is actually worth the punt at 4.7 million. He probably would be the pick of the bunch between the brackets of 4.3 and 4.7 million. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, but I think Lewis has to be in those wildcard teams. So from one end of the pitch to the other, we're now taking a look at the best budget forwards for those game week 6 wildcard teams. And generally, if you are looking to make a forward transfer, who is the best budget forward to bring in? Because if we're going for these premium defenders, we're trying to lock in people like a Saka and Mbeumo and maybe a third mid-price midfielder, I do think naturally going alongside Erling Haaland, we can't be affording a premium front line either. I absolutely do think a budget forward line is what we have to go for. And Wood and Calvert-Lewin are the ones that are picking up a lot of traction right now. And I'm seeing a lot of wildcards that are actually going for Wood and Calvert-Lewin. And if that is the case, then you don't have to watch this section because you're already owning both of them. But for those managers that are maybe looking at maybe just one of these players, we need to get an understanding of which one is actually the priority pick going forward. So first up, I want to take a look at the underlying numbers for both. Now, these are based on overall, not per 90 minutes, so take that into account. Otherwise, the 2.81 XG of Wood would be ridiculous per 90 minutes. So the minutes for both have been pretty identical. I think both are their starting men at forward. Yes, we do have someone like Awoni knocking on the bench at Nottingham Forest, but I don't really see him stealing minutes from Wood anytime soon. And Calvert-Lewin, while he remains fit, is going to continue to start for Sean Dyche's Everton. Yes, the narrative that he always gets injured will all obviously be driving some conversations, but until he actually gets injured, I just don't really want to consider that for Calvert-Lewin's availability. So take a look at the numbers right now. Both have had 11 shots apiece, 8 on target for Chris Wood, 4 for Calvert-Lewin. I do think with Chris Wood, I associate him with being a bit more of a better finisher than Calvert-Lewin. That's just my personal opinion after watching Wood for over the years. Calvert-Lewin historically has been a bit snatchy with his finishes, it is worth noting. In terms of expected goals, 2.81 for Chris Wood, 1.83 for Calvert-Lewin. But of course, Chris Wood did have that penalty in game week 5, which is a real big factor because, of course, he took the penalty ahead of someone like Gibbs White, who we always associated with being the penalty taker for Nottingham Forest. So that is just another string to the bow of Chris Wood as an option for our game week 6 wildcard teams. And I really do think that makes him even better as a pick. In terms of big chances, 5 apiece. You can see the trend here. These two are basically going neck and neck in terms of underlying numbers at the start of this season. And in terms of expected FPL points, Calvert-Lewin 21.39 and he's actually delivered 24. But the real interesting one here is that Chris Wood has an expected FPL points of 30.5 and he's delivered 29. So usually when we see something like 29 points, we usually see quite a big overperformance in that department. But Chris Wood is bang on the money right now going into game week 6. And that is really promising when we're looking at bringing in a forward. Which player can actually sustain the returns that he's already delivered? And based on what I'm reading right now, I think Chris Wood is actually going to be that man. Now, I need to put up the fixtures because at the end of the day, fixtures are king. And I think when we're bringing in any forward, we are going to look to start him in every single fixture. But with Chris Wood, game week 6 at home against Fulham, I would argue both have pretty identical fixtures, both at home, both against decent enough teams. But Chris Wood at home against Fulham. Game week 7 is the one there's a bit of a swing, away against an informed Chelsea team right now, whereas Calvert-Lewin up against, I would argue, quite an out-of-form Newcastle, so I would say Calvert-Lewin has the better game week 6 fixture. Game week 8, pretty identical, Lewin away against Ipswich, Wood at home against Crystal Palace, and then of course game week 9, very similar to that game week 10. So I'd actually argue the fixtures are pretty identical for both, maybe just in the favour of Calvert-Lewin, but because the fixtures are so identical and the underlying numbers are pretty appealing towards Chris Wood, if I had to only select one going into game week 6 on a wildcard, I would favour Chris Wood personally. Yes, there is Iwoni waiting in the wings to get some minutes off the bench, but I still think Chris Wood is absolutely Nuno's number one man, and while he continues his numbers and is now on penalties, I slightly prefer him over Calvert-Lewin. But looking at these numbers and the fixtures, if you want to go for both, I absolutely think that is now a strategy for those FPL teams. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. So with the way that Game Week 6 wildcard teams are being structured, a lot of managers are going down the route of a premium midfielder in the shape of Bukayo Saka, a mid-price midfielder like an Mbeumo, who I do think is the standout pick with those fixtures and him being the talisman, and a cheap midfielder. So with the 2 available midfield spots, there absolutely is budget there to bring in a midfielder between the prices of 6.5 million and 8.5 million. And I know people like James Maddison have been spoken about, but with the next few fixtures for them being tricky, I think these 3 players here are the standout picks outside of Saka, Mbeumo and Morgan Rogers. The big question is, who do we actually go for? So first up, I want to take a look at the underlying numbers, and these are based on per 90 minutes. And the reason being is Diaz has actually played quite a lot of minutes less than that of an Eze and a Bruno Fernandes. You can see that here. And that is probably one of the negatives of Luis Diaz, is that we're seeing him coming off early in games. Even though he is delivering, it's worth noting, he is actually coming off between 60 and 70 minutes quite consistently because of all the firepower Liverpool have in Gakpo and Darwin Núñez. So even though the numbers here based on per 90 minutes are ridiculous for Luis Diaz, and we'll take a look at them now, we also need to take into account that if he does come off this high of finishing, we are going to then just be looking at him as a player that is basically just getting rotated in this Liverpool team. But while he continues these numbers, he is a joke. XG per 90 at 0.94 is ridiculous. It is basically double that of Eze, much better than that of Bruno Fernandes is. He's getting so many big chances per 90 minutes, 1.75 again. Eze and Bruno Fernandes come nowhere near that at 0.8 and 0.62 respectively. And even in the creativity department, I'll be expecting to see Bruno Fernandes dominating this area. But again, Luis Diaz at 0.27 expected assists per 90 compared to Eze's 0.12 and Bruno Fernandes' 0.17. So the numbers right now are just overwhelmingly in Luis Diaz's favour. And again, with him scoring all these goals, he is accumulating ridiculous bonus points at 1.99 per 90 compared to Eze's 0.6. And Bruno hasn't even picked up a bonus point yet, hence he hasn't actually scored a goal this season. So in terms of the numbers, it's just been ridiculous. Luis Diaz has been in the form of his life, and it's worth noting going into the weekend, he was also benched and an unused sub in their EFL Cup game. So that all points towards him getting significant minutes in their game on the weekend against Wolves, whereas someone like a Darwin Núñez played the full 90. Jota played 60. So we need to take all these things into account when we're considering a rotation risk like Luis Diaz. So numbers-wise, Luis Diaz leading the way, and I actually do prefer Eze over Bruno Fernandes. I'm going to put it out there because he is a lot cheaper. So take a look at the fixtures, because again, fixtures are king. Man United are actually quite an interesting prospect. Game week 6 against Spurs, while on paper it doesn't look great, I do think Spurs always give up opportunities to their opposition. So I don't think Bruno is a terrible pick for game week 6. Villa away in game week 7, again, that could be deemed quite a tricky game. But then between game weeks 8 and 11, I actually do think Man United have some quite favourable fixtures over that time. Now, of course, there is going to be Europa League fixtures that Man United need to compete in, but we know Bruno Fernandes is a minutes monster, and that isn't going to affect him at all. When we take a look at Crystal Palace, I would argue this is a very, very indifferent run of fixtures. Everton away, I think, eventually are going to put up a resolute performance, so that day may come in game week 6. Game week 7, tricky against Liverpool. Game week 8, away against Nottingham Forest, not ideal. 9 to 11, I think, are good fixtures. And finally, Liverpool. Again, Champions League fixtures we need to take into account. Next 2 away from home, but I do think the 2 teams, Wolves and Palace, have been poor. Then they come into a tricky run of Chelsea and Arsenal, Brighton, Aston Villa. So the fixtures long term are probably more difficult for that of Liverpool. But if I was wildcarding right now, I just think Luis Diaz has to be in those teams. He's in unbelievable form. The numbers are incredible. And even though the fixtures are a little bit mixed, I still fully expect him to play between 60 and 70 minutes. And with these numbers, I still think he is absolutely the play to go for. And I actually would pick Eze over Bruno Fernandes myself. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'll be really interested to know if anybody's going for a differential mid-price midfielder. So probably one of the most difficult positions to pick in our wildcard teams for game week 6 is going to be those cheap defenders. Now again, based on the video that we've been looking at right now in the essentials, I really do think a combination of Gvardiol, Trent, Rico Lewis and a 4 million defender is just going to be naturally the template wildcard team. You obviously might have a completely different defense and I appreciate that, but that is going to be pretty much a template. Trent, Gvardiol, Rico Lewis, a 4 million in the shape of Greaves. So there's only really one defender spot that we need to select, and I do think it needs to be a budget enabler that can actually rotate if required, because if your team's going to be Trent, Gvardiol and Rico Lewis, those 3 are basically going to play every single week, and it's a case of having a viable defender that you know is going to offer guaranteed game time, and at times, if he has to come in, a decent fixture in those specific weeks. And the 3 that I've picked up right now are going to be Everton's Mikalenko at 4.3 million, which is ridiculous price. Nottingham Forest's Aina at 4.5, who's had a great start to the season, and Brentford's Collins at 4.5 million. Now, I have to say this, I'm not putting up any numbers here because these 3 are damn boring, and you probably will turn it off if I put up the XG and the expected assists of those 3. You just ain't getting that with these players, let's be real. These are your classic 4th defenders. I don't really think there is one right now that is standing out, that is offering clean sheet potential, attacking returns. That guy is Rico Lewis, basically. We just want a guy that if we call upon him, he can come into the team. So it's all about fixtures when we are looking at these 3 specific players. So top of the tree for fixtures are going to be Brentford. Game week 6, 7 and 9 in particular are brilliant home games against West Ham, Wolves and Ipswich. And again, we just need to know that if a player needs to come into our FPL teams, he at least will have a good fixture. And I will in a minute pop up the rotation planner of these players to get an idea on when you could play them alongside Gvardiol, Trent and Rico Lewis, with the assumption that you are going down that route. And again, you can do whatever you want. Now, Everton, Mikalenko at 4.3 million, straight away because of the price, I'm thinking to myself, is there any negative to this guy? Because if I could save myself 0.2 million and bring in someone like Mikalenko, then happy days. Now, with Everton's fixtures, I actually think they're great as well. I know Everton have been poor in terms of outcome, but they haven't actually been terrible in terms of the underlying numbers. And again, even though there are a lot of doubts about Sean Dyche, I still back him to resolve the issues at Everton. And with the return of Jared Branthwaite, which is a huge factor that we need to take into consideration, I only think we're going to see an improvement in Everton over this period. So Palace at home, Newcastle at home, tricky because both of those teams can score goals, but not the worst. Ipswich away in game week 8, Fulham at home in game week 9, Southampton in game week 10. I actually think as a run of fixtures, they are not bad at all. If you said to me they were to pick up 2 clean sheets, I wouldn't be surprised at that personally. And I think Mykolenko at 4.3 million. Yes, he is yellow flagged right now, but it's only because of illness. We are expecting him to return to this Everton team when he is fully fit and raring to go. That's probably only the one negative is, do we know he's available for game week 6 100%? Finally, we're looking at Aina here. Forest of the bunch have basically been the best defensive team, both on underlying numbers and just general clean sheets. And we can see here for Forest's fixtures, Fulham, Chelsea, Palace, Leicester, West Ham. Once again, great long-term fixtures. And we're not looking to play these players basically any week. It's just whether they need to come into the teams as a rotation player if Rico Lewis was to be benched. And even though Aina isn't going to offer any thrills, I do think he is just a solid pick in that Nottingham Forest backline for guaranteed minutes. Now, what I'm going to do right now is pop up the rotation planner firstly for Brentford, because of course they are top of the tree. So if you were to have Collins, for example, let's be real, you're going to play Gvardiol, Trent and Rico Lewis in any fixture. But you can see here, if you wanted to, if you felt like Rico Lewis's fixture away against Newcastle was tough, you could bench Rico Lewis for this week and start him easily in game week 6. Game week 7, I know it does say to bench Trent, but you're never going to bench Trent in that week. But if you were to get into game week 8, and of course, we are going to be starting those players, him away against Man United is probably, I would argue, his only terrible fixture where I wouldn't be looking to play him. But then game week 9, when Arsenal play up against Liverpool, if you're in that boat where you say to yourself, I don't want to start one of these players, and I still would, but if you were looking to not, he has a brilliant game at home against Ipswich. So I think Collins actually rotates really well for game week 9 in particular, if you feel like you don't want to start Trent or Gvardiol. Take a look at Aina at Nottingham Forest. Similar pattern here. If you need to play him in game week 9, he absolutely can do in game week away against Leicester. And in game week 6, you could even play him in Forest game at home against Fulham. So a great fixture there as well. I think he rotates well with the rest of the team. Finally, I need to pick up Mykolenko because, spoiler alert, he is going to be my top pick. You can see here, game week 9, home against Fulham. Great rotation if you need to bring him in. Game week 6, he's fantastic if you're worried about Rico Lewis's minutes. And you can also play him in game week 8 and 10 if you felt inclined to. So all in all, at 4.3 million, I do think Mykolenko is the route that I would go for. I think he rotates well with the template defenders in the game. His fixtures are good. And I think Sean Dyche is going to turn around this Everton defence. Let me know your top pick in the comments section. So it feels only right on a wildcard special video to put up what would be my game week 6 wildcard team if I was to use it. So this is it here. Now, of course, there are a few caveats that we need to note. At the time of recording, we have no idea whether David Raya is going to be available for game week 6. And if he isn't, I think it's actually a brilliant opportunity for FPL managers to go against the Arsenal double defence and go for maybe double Arsenal attacker. We'll cover that off in a minute. But also I want to say is that David Raya, I do think, is being slightly overhyped. I've spoken about it at the start of the video. Up against the opposition, I don't think he'll rack up the saves unless Arsenal get another red card. And I don't see him picking up huge bonus points. So while you will have the effective ownership of double Arsenal defence for their clean sheets, which inevitably will come, I do think the upside pick is going to be going for double Arsenal attack. So Flecken in goal to give us that coverage of Brentford, who I've spoken about in the defender section, have great long-term fixtures. And I do think he's a perfect example of a big haul goalkeeper if he is to rack up saves and bonus points. Fabianski as the 4 million goalkeeper. In terms of defence, I've touched on it. I think this is going to be a very template defence. Gvardiol, Trent and Rico Lewis as the 3 defenders that you're basically going to start every single week. And Mykolenko, the one that if you need to drop him in, for example, if we get news that Rico Lewis isn't starting in game week 6, you can start Mykolenko with confidence with that great fixture that they do have at home against Palace, some would deem. And you can also use him in game week 9 when they play up against Fulham, when Arsenal play up against Liverpool. So I think Mykolenko is a great enabler in this team at 4.3 million. And Greaves, of course, as the choice 4 million defender. Now, in terms of the midfielders, I've spoken about it. Saka, I think, is essential. I think Brian Mbeumo is essential. And I personally still think Rodgers, while he is a 90-minute man in this Villa team, is still the go-to pick at that cheap price. But Semenyo's going to come in at 5.6 million. Now, we haven't massively touched on this, but I do think with the Bournemouth fixtures coming up, their home games that they do have, it is the right time to jump on Bournemouth for a short-term period. And then we can look at one of these positions to maybe pivot to another cheap enabling midfielder, because I don't see many transfers being needed for this team over the longer term. So using it to maybe fleet between a Semenyo and then drop it to another Smith Rowe later down the line isn't actually a bad move to make as we progress through the game week. So Semenyo is going to be my choice of another cheap midfielder in the game. And as I've spoken about, Luis Diaz for me is still the player to go for. While he continues playing 70 minutes and putting up the numbers, I am absolutely content with that right now. I don't think this team needs to upgrade to a Cole Palmer. Even though I think he's a fantastic option, I think Diaz is basically doing everything that we want from a midfielder. And it's just very difficult to look past him right now. But the big discussion here is, of course, going to be the forwards. Erling Haaland, obviously in, and Chris Wood's going to be in based on what we've spoken about. I do feel like Chris Wood is slightly the preference over a Calvert-Lewin. But again, I absolutely love the Wood and Calvert-Lewin combination. But if we are going to swing against the Arsenal double defence, what an opportunity to go for Kai Havertz going into game week 6. Yes, there are some concerns about him maybe playing in a midfield position at times, but I still think he is the go-to number 9 in this Arsenal team. I think he is absolutely Arteta's man. And going into these two home games against Leicester and Southampton, I feel like Kai Havertz absolutely has the potential for double-digit returns. And I'd actually much rather be quite aggressive with this move. The one thing I do like as well, and not a lot of people are talking about it, is it also allows you to put a placeholder in for later down the line. A lot of people talking about putting Dominic Solanke in their teams. And while I think he is a good pick, not really for the next two against Man United and Brighton, I actually think Dominic Solanke's fixtures start to get good when Arsenal's get bad. So what a brilliant player to have in your team at Kai Havertz to then go sideways and pivot to a Dominic Solanke if you want to go to that position, which will then free up funds for you to invest elsewhere in this team. So for that reason, based on the rumours of David Raya, no guarantees of him starting, I actually really like Kai Havertz as a bit of a differential. So that is going to be the Game Week 6 wildcard team if I was to activate it. And it isn't actually that expensive, it's worth noting. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'll be super interested to know what would your wildcard team be, and do you like this particular team? Yes, guys, okay, that's going to wrap up today's Game Week 6 wildcard special video. I really hope I provided some value going through the players that I would buy and hopefully a bit of analysis on those big headaches that managers are having right now. And again, let me know your thoughts on my wildcard team if I was to activate it. I will be doing a team selection video tomorrow because I am one of the few managers that feels that is still and ahhing about whether to activate the wildcard. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, if you did enjoy it, please do drop a like and smash that subscribe button for daily fantasy content. I, of course, will be doing a deadline live stream Saturday morning. Any questions, put them in the comment section. Have an amazing day. Take care. I'll see you real soon. Cheers.